At the young age of only 28, Zayn Malik has managed to get 16 music awards. That's quite impressive, but it hasn't been without its difficulty. He's had very public drama, breaking up with Gigi Hadid, being accused of hitting her mother, and also coming out with an eating disorder in his book, and leaving One Direction, which is of course where he got his fame. Now, I believe that these all link together, and I'm going to explain how in this video. We're going to go through his eating disorder, what eating disorders are, how that links to his current difficulties, and the fact that he's on WooPlus, which is a plus-size dating app looking for a new partner. If you don't know who I am, my name is Saramed. I'm a practicing doctor in London. I make videos about celebrity health mainly. If that's something you're into, hit subscribe and you will get notified every time I pop a new video on. I do put a lot of work into these videos, so I hope you enjoy them, and let's get right into it. So Zayn Malik, he started his career out in One Direction and they were going relatively well until he left in 2015. Now shortly after, in 2016, he came out and released his autobiography, which was called Zayn, where he detailed some of his difficulties on living life on the road. Now, fans, even before that book, were quite concerned about his health, saying that he was on drugs or that he had some other kind of disease, but he actually did have an eating disorder. So what he said was essentially that life on the road was just so fast that he couldn't keep up with the pace, and he couldn't control what was happening there, but he could control his food. And to maintain that control, he basically didn't eat anything for 2 or 3 days in a row, which obviously was not healthy. And that was part of the reasons why he actually left One Direction in the first place. Interestingly, he did say things like, "It wasn't as though I had any concerns about my weight or anything like that. I'd just go for days, sometimes 2 or 3 days straight without eating anything at all. It got quite serious, although at the time I didn't recognize it for what it was. The workload and the pace of life on the road, put together with the pressures and strains of everything going on within the band, had badly affected my eating habits." So he said he has an eating disorder. Let's go into that in more detail. So what actually is an eating disorder? It's not just a diet or someone controlling their food intake to try and reduce their weight. It is a pathological way of feeding, whether that be overeating or undereating, which leads to kind of physical, psychological, and social distress and long-term consequences as a result of that. Most people associate eating disorders with women, but actually about 8% are in women and about 2% are in men. So it really still does happen in men, even though it's more under-publicized. There are lots of different types of eating disorders. Some of the most common ones are bulimia or anorexia nervosa, and other disorders which are less common, things like avoidant/restrictive food intake disorder, which is also known as RFID. I'm going to go through those in a little bit more detail. So anorexia nervosa might be the most famous one. The name anorexia actually comes from Greek, which an means no and orexis means hunger. So add the nervosa on the end and it basically means nervous lack of hunger, which basically describes what the disease is, which is essentially that you do not want to eat. Now, everyone with anorexia nervosa is different, but generally patients have symptoms such as incorrect body image, seeing themselves as bigger than they actually are, and they have excessive exercise in one of the types, and in the second type actually they overeat and then they can purge as well. Very similar to bulimia nervosa, which is characterized by overeating and purging, but usually patients with bulimia nervosa tend to be actually or more a normal weight or even overweight, rather than patients with anorexia nervosa who tend to be underweight. There are lots and lots of different things that can cause these kind of eating disorders, such as biological factors, psychological factors, interpersonal factors, and even environmental factors. So if we speak about biological factors, those things like genetics, so you sometimes see eating disorders run in families. Talking about psychological factors, then if people are depressed, anxious, lonely, feel isolated, then these can cause eating disorders to become more likely. If you're talking about interpersonal factors, patients who have had a history of being ridiculed for being overweight, or if they've been victims of sexual abuse, then they are also more likely to develop eating disorders as a result. And when you look at environmental factors, those are things like cultural norms. Like in some cultures, women who are more thin are seen as more beautiful, more higher value, and also certain professions like modeling, acting, ballet.
Because in Paris and Milan, they like the girls just a tad on the skinny side.
And so all of those pressures combined can lead to the development of eating disorders. Now, of course, I say for women because more commonly it does happen for women, but the same can also apply to men as well, since they do certainly suffer from eating disorders quite commonly as well. Now, if we look at Zayn Malik, does he fit into the anorexia nervosa category? Well, not necessarily, because usually that is associated with distorted body image, and he did say that his lack of eating was not associated with his body image. Of course, I'm not his personal physician, I don't have confidential information, but based on what he said, it seems like he would be more on the RFID, which is the avoidant / restrictive food intake disorder, and that is usually associated with a limit of food intake due to wanting control, or potentially because of dislike for the texture or the taste or the consistency of food itself, but it's not to do with body image. So that could potentially be his diagnosis. Now, eating disorders are quite difficult to treat, and in the healthcare environment, we do try and encourage patients with a multidisciplinary team, which means you have usually a psychologist, a dietitian, and a physician looking after a patient, where the physician looks after the medical consequences, because let's say if you're grossly underweight, your metabolism goes down, it can crash, you can end up with electrolyte disturbances, low sodium, potassium, magnesium. Those can lead to all kinds of problems like arrhythmias, and you can also end up with endocrine and hormone problems, which us as physicians would treat. And then you also have our colleagues, the dietitians, who would be able to give a feeding plan to safely restore food back into the body. And you also have psychologists who can explore all of the negative emotions surrounding food and its perceptions, and try and give more healthy coping mechanisms for those emotions. And with those three prongs of attack, then hopefully you can help the patient to recover. Now, it seems as though Zayn Malik identified the problem himself, which was the fact that he was in One Direction, he was living on the road. And actually you can see when you look at the videos of how the band were interacting with each other at that time, he seemed unhappy. So take a look at this video from Ellen.
And then we come out. Oh yeah, this guy.
Are you the one that remembers?
He's obviously very uncomfortable there, being with his bandmate, feeling so close and awkward, shuffling around. His body language is all off. If you actually watch the interview, he engages very little. Ellen tries to engage him once or twice. He gives a few words, and then she goes back to speaking to Harry Styles. He feels othered in that group. for, you know, whatever reason. I don't want to speculate, but it was not the right environment for him, and he noticed that, and so he made the change and decided to leave, which was the correct thing for him, and he's doing much better as a result, which is excellent, because, you know, it's good to see someone recover from their illness. And actually, I massively commend him for going public with his diagnosis, because it can help other people with eating disorders feel more normal about kind of sharing and gaining help, particularly those who are men, because, you know, they may feel as though this is not a condition which affects men, but now they have this kind of role model who they can say, okay, well, if he's done it, then, you know, I can seek help as well, which is fantastic. So Zayn, I know you're probably not watching this, but if you are, huge props to you. And, you know, I'm glad that your book was very successful, with a 5-star rating on Amazon, with over 1,000 ratings. So that is excellent. I'll drop the link in the description for anyone who wants to read that autobiography. It's interesting because now, fast forward, with that background, we have Zayn Malik in the, you know, public eye. There's been a lot of problems with Yolanda Hadid, which is Gigi Hadid's mom. And very interestingly, Yolanda Hadid is one of the perpetrators of eating disorders. She really takes it to the next level when controlling her children's diet, particularly with Gigi, where you can see in these clips how she stops her from eating the foods that she wants. Take a look.
Their bodies are big and bulky, and I mean, they eat like men. I wanted her to develop as a woman.
I thought that my daughter was lesbian.
It was clear here that Yolanda is part of that modeling environment, and she thinks she's doing what's best for her child, but really this attitude is toxic, and it's promoting distorted body image, as well as unhealthy eating habits.
I'm so excited for the food. Pretty much all the food that we're eating is like a heart attack in a meal. It's like, but it's gonna be so good.
It's good. You can have one night of being bad, right?
Yeah, I was actually really good this week.
Yeah. And then you got to get back on your diet, though. Because, you know, in Paris and Milan, they like the girls just a tad on the skinny side.
And I hope that others can see that and, you know, take a step back from it. You can imagine now, with knowing the background of Zayn Malik, how it must feel dealing with Gigi Hadid's mom when she tries to control Gigi's food intake. You know, considering it took him a while to be able to get over his own eating disorder, and now seeing, you know, his ex now being controlled by a mom, he must have significant clashes there. And it's clear that this has accrued over time, because, you know, Zayn and Gigi have actually broken up 3 times now. And usually that happens when there's some kind of external factor there, when the couple actually, you know, do like each other, but there is something else which is stopping them from being together. That being said, you know, now it says Yolanda's telling people around that Zayn struck her, and she's extremely upset and caused issues with Zayn and Gigi. And apparently that was the reason why they broke up most recently. Obviously, you can make your own assessments. From Zayn's side, he denies all the allegations, and he says that Yolanda was leaking pictures of their child, Kai, online, which obviously they wanted to keep private. You know, I don't know what the truth is. All I know is, certainly, you know, it does seem as though she is toxic, and she has had some kind of poor behaviors in the past, from what I can see. And Zayn generally seems like a relatively calm person, but of course, who knows what can happen behind closed doors. Either way, it must have been very frustrating for him to deal with that level of control over a prolonged period of time. So, interestingly, on a lighter note, after this breakup, someone who was on this dating app WooPlus, which is basically for people who are looking for more plus size people to date and actually have that as a type, found that Zayn was doing this video as like an emoji reaction thing, which is what they do on that platform. Take a look. So, I mean, that's even more evidence that, you know, Zayn is sick of being with someone who controls their food so much, and he just wants someone who can be kind of open and kind of unrestricted and just be able to eat what they want when they want, and not care about all of these kind of restrictions and rules. That being said, you know, obviously overeating is still not a good thing and can be classed as an eating disorder in itself, and there's actually one called binge eating disorder. So moderation is key. Now, just one last point. It's interesting that Yolanda Hadid, after Gigi and Zayn broke up, actually claimed that she wanted custody of their child Kai because she thinks that the child is not actually Zayn Malik's child and that her daughter was unfaithful, and so she wants to get a paternity test for her child to prove that Zayn's not the father, even though Gigi strongly denies this, and so does Zayn. So that is kind of the level of drama and control that they are dealing with. Either way, I am so glad and so inspired to see that someone with a medical condition could come out the other side successful, and I wish, you know, all of them involved in this the best of times. I hope you found this video useful, particularly if you are suffering with an eating disorder. You know, if you do have any questions, please drop them in the comment section below. I'll be more than happy to help, but I cannot provide official medical advice online. Obviously, we are limited in what we can do. If you did enjoy this video, I'm sure you would enjoy the video on Billie Eilish's battle with Tourette syndrome, and that will be over here. So take a look at that. Peace out and stay healthy, stay happy.